She was supposed to be the obedient wife, the silent one, the woman who signed papers without asking questions and smiled at dinner parties while her husband whispered in other women's ears. For 7 years, Amara Viscari played that role perfectly. Too perfectly. Because while Lucian built his empire with blood and iron, Amara was doing something far more dangerous. She was reading. Every document, every account number, every buried secret. Tonight, she placed it all on his desk. And the most feared man on the East Coast finally understood what it feels like to be powerless. If this story already has your heart pounding, you're exactly where you need to be. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications because I release stories like this every week. Stories about power, betrayal, survival, and the people everyone underestimated until it was far too late. Drop a like on this video and leave me a comment telling me what city and country you're watching from. I genuinely want to see how far this story travels. Now settle in, because what comes next will keep you up at night. The rain came in sideways that October night, the kind that doesn't simply fall but attacks, lashing the iron gates of the Viscari estate, flooding the stone gutters, drowning the security lights in halos of gray mist. The guards at the perimeter said nothing to each other. They knew better than to speak unnecessarily when the boss was expected home. Conversation was a habit that attracted attention, and attention in this household had a way of becoming a liability. Lucian Viscari's car turned through the gate at 11:43. The driver, a compact man named Pharaoh, who had been with Lucian for 9 years, kept his eyes forward as the Mercedes rolled up the gravel drive. He did not comment on the perfume. He had smelled it before, floral, heavy, expensive, a scent that did not belong to the woman who lived inside the house. Pharaoh had learned early that the things he did not comment on were the things that kept him employed. Lucian stepped out before the car fully stopped. He was dressed in charcoal gray, jacket unbuttoned, tie loosened at the collar. He was a large man, not soft, not theatrical about it the way younger bosses sometimes were, but solidly present in the way that buildings are present. People felt him before they saw him. He had dark eyes, a jaw that looked like it had been argued into existence, and the particular expression of someone who had not genuinely smiled in a very long time. He was 44 years old. He had been running the East Coast organization since he was 29. In those 15 years, he had buried rivals, broken alliances, rebuilt them, absorbed smaller families into his operation, and managed to remain invisible to federal investigators through a combination of financial engineering and deliberate violence at the precise moments when visibility would have been costly. He was good at his work. He had always been good at his work. He walked into his house without removing his shoes. His housekeeper, a woman named Petra, who was 61 and moved through the estate like she was trying not to disturb the air, materialized briefly in the hallway. She said nothing. Her face said something, though, a tightness around the eyes, a held breath. But Lucian did not look at her long enough to read it. He went directly to his private office. It was the room at the end of the east corridor, lined with bookshelves he used for appearances and a single desk he used for everything real. No art on the walls, no personal photographs. The room was cold and functional, which was how he preferred the spaces where he actually worked. Amara was sitting behind his desk. He stopped in the doorway. She was 6 months pregnant, the curve of her stomach visible beneath a dark silk blouse, and she was sitting with the particular stillness of someone who had been waiting for a long time and had decided, somewhere in that wait, to stop being afraid. Her hair was down. She was not wearing jewelry. Her hands were resting flat on the desk, on either side of a plain manila folder. She looked up at him and said, "Close the door." He almost laughed. Almost. Instead, something moved through his chest that he would have called irritation if he'd been honest, but which was actually something closer to a warning signal firing somewhere deep and animal. He closed the door. "It's late," he said. "Why are you in here?" "Sit down, Lucian." The words were quiet. No performance in them. That was what made them land. He looked at her for a long moment, the folder, her hands, her face, and then he crossed to the chair across from his own desk and sat down. The position annoyed him immediately. He was sitting on the wrong side of his own furniture, in his own office, in his own house. He told himself it did not matter. He told himself he was humoring her. "Read it," Amara said, and pushed the folder across the desk. He opened it, expecting divorce papers. He had thought about this moment, not often, but occasionally, in the way that men who have been careless think about consequences. He had already calculated what he would offer. A townhouse in the city, a monthly allowance that was generous enough to demonstrate he was not petty, but not so generous that it suggested guilt. Limited contact with the child until the appropriate arrangements could be established. He had the outline ready. He started reading. The first page killed the outline. The documents were not a divorce filing. They were a transfer, a comprehensive, legally airtight transfer of assets into a protected trust. The trust was established for the benefit of their unborn child. Amara was named as trustee with full administrative control. The assets listed were, Lucian had to read the column twice, the offshore accounts, the waterfront properties in 3 different states, the shell corporations nested inside holding companies, nested inside registered entities and jurisdictions he had specifically chosen because they were difficult to penetrate. The total was staggering, not because of the number, though the number was very large, but because no one outside his innermost circle knew those holdings existed. He had spent years constructing the opacity. The accounts had different names. The properties were registered to companies that had no visible connection to him. The shell corporations were layered specifically to prevent any single person from seeing the complete picture. He looked up. Amara's expression had not changed. "How?" he said. And that was the whole sentence. "You put things in front of me and told me to sign," she said. "You never explained what I was signing. You assumed I wouldn't bother to understand it." She paused. "I understood all of it." "That's not possible. Every company name, every account number, the proxy owners and which ones were actually controlled by you through the secondary structures, the debt instruments you used to move money between the shell entities, the real estate holdings and which ones were purchased clean and which ones were purchased with money that needed to be explained." She said it the way someone reads a grocery list, methodical, without drama. "I had 7 years, Lucian. You were not a careful man about what you left on that desk." He felt something shift in his chest. Not fear. He had not felt fear in a very long time, and he was not certain he was feeling it now, but something adjacent to it. A sudden awareness of ground that was not as solid as he had believed. "You can't file these," he said. "Half of what's in there. I know what's in there." She met his eyes. "There's a second folder." There was. He hadn't noticed it, tucked beneath the first. He opened it. Tax fraud. Not the sophisticated kind that required interpretation, the obvious kind. The numbers that did not match the numbers. The declarations that contradicted the transactions he could trace directly to entities he controlled. Money laundering. The routing through 3 separate businesses that existed only as facades. Political bribes. Documented, dates, amounts, names of recipients, cross-referenced with voting records and regulatory decisions that had benefited the Vescari operation. And at the back of the second folder, photographs of shipments, manifests, delivery confirmations from ports on the eastern seaboard, federal investigators. She had said it quietly, but it landed like a flat stone dropped into still water. "If I don't sign the transfer," Amar said, "copies of both folders go to the Eastern District by morning." Lucian put the folder down. He had not survived 15 years in this world by losing his composure in rooms where composure mattered. He breathed through the next few seconds the way he would breathe through any other moment that required him to be disciplined. Slow, through the nose, letting the initial response pass through him before he acted on it. "You've been planning this," he said. "I've been preparing this," she corrected. "Planning implies I wanted to use it. I didn't. I wanted it to exist so I would never need to. And now you need to." She looked at him for a moment. "Sign the transfer, Lucian. Everything goes into the trust. It protects our child. Your business continues as before. I'm not taking your empire. I'm taking what belongs to my daughter." He stared at the paperwork. The thing that was eating at him was not the money. He could rebuild. He had built it once. He could protect other assets, establish new structures, root around the transferred holdings. The money was significant, but not fatal. What was eating at him was the question of how long. How long had she known? How long had she been sitting in this house, behind this carefully constructed face of elegant compliance, holding everything he had built in her understanding like a map she had memorized and never shown anyone? He picked up the pen. He signed. He signed it the way he signed most things, quickly, without ceremony. because he had learned years ago that hesitation was more costly than action. When he put the pen down, Amara did not move to collect the papers immediately. She looked at him for a moment as if she was deciding whether to say the next thing. He could see her making the decision. He had never noticed her making decisions before. He had never looked at her long enough. "There's something else," she said. He waited. "The woman you've been seeing," Amar said. "The nightclub hostess, Vivienne Cross." The muscles in his jaw tightened. "Amara. Her real name is Katerina Orlov." She said it without raising her voice. "She is the niece of Mikhail Orlov. The identity she's using, Vivienne Cross, was stolen from a woman who died in a car accident in 2019 in Bratislava. The documentation is very convincing. Your background check would not have caught it because the people who built her cover identity are professionals." Silence. "Her relationship with you was not personal," Amara continued. "It was an infiltration operation designed to give the Orlov syndicate access to your business intelligence." Lucian's voice was very controlled. "You're telling me—" "I'm telling you that the private routes you discussed with her are now known to the Orlov network. The meeting you took in Baltimore in August, she passed the attendee list and the agenda within 48 hours. The conversation you had in her apartment about the commission vote in November, Mikhail Orlov made 3 phone calls in the following week that directly correspond to the information you shared." Lucian was not a man who showed what was happening inside him. That was a point of discipline he had maintained since he was young enough to understand that visibility was vulnerability. But sitting in that chair, across from his wife, the man who had spent 15 years making other people feel powerless, understood for the first time in a very long time what it felt like to stand on ground that had already been moved beneath you without your knowledge. "How long have you known?" he asked. 3 months? The words hit him like something physical. 3 months, he repeated. "I needed to be certain," she said, "and I needed to secure the evidence properly before I said anything. If I had come to you immediately, you would have confronted her immediately, and she would have disappeared, and the Orlovs would have known their access was compromised and simply adjusted their approach." Her voice was even. "I needed this to be complete before it became visible. You've been watching me with her for 3 months and you said nothing." "I've been watching you for 7 years, Amara said. Silence was never the difficult part. He stood up. Not in anger, or not only in anger, but because sitting felt wrong, felt passive, felt like a position he could not think clearly from. He walked to the window and looked out at the rain hammering the glass. "You could have warned me," he said. "You had evidence of a threat to my operation, and you held it for 3 months. I had evidence of a threat to your operation and a folder full of evidence of your crimes," Amara said. "I used them in the order that served our child's future. Not your feelings." He turned around. She was still sitting behind his desk. Still. The folder with his signatures was in front of her. The second folder with the evidence sat closed to her right. She was 6 months pregnant and she looked, not calm exactly, because calm was the wrong word, but settled. Like someone who has made a very long journey and has finally arrived somewhere they intended to reach. "I'm not declaring war," Amara said. "I want to be clear about that. If I had wanted you destroyed, you would already be destroyed. What I wanted was a future for my daughter that doesn't depend on your goodwill or your fidelity or your ability to stay alive." She stood up slowly, one hand briefly on the edge of the desk for balance. "She has that now. Whatever happens next between us, this is hers." She picked up both folders and walked toward the door. Lucian said her name. She stopped, didn't turn around. "Is she safe?" he asked. "Vivienne? Katerina. Is she still—" "She's still operating," Amar said. "She doesn't know I know. She believes her cover is intact." A pause. "What you do with that information is your decision. I gave you the tools. The rest of this is yours to manage." She walked out. Lucian stood in his own office, in the middle of his own empire, listening to the rain, and for the first time in 15 years he was not thinking about leverage or strategy or the next move. He was thinking about a woman who had sat beside him at 7 years of dinners, who had signed documents he never explained to her, who had smiled at parties he brought her to as furniture, and who had spent that entire time quietly, methodically, building something he hadn't seen. He picked up his phone, called his chief investigator, gave him a name, Katerina Orlov, told him to verify everything, quickly and without making noise. Then he stood there and waited for the thing he already knew would come back confirmed. It did, by 4 in the morning. Every detail, every connection, every stolen identity, the routes that had been compromised, the meetings that had been reported back. The woman he had trusted in the dark had been the Orlov family's eyes inside his operation for 18 months. Amara had known for 3 of those months and had told no one. She had sat on information that could have gotten her killed, and she had used it to build a wall around their daughter rather than a weapon against him. Lucian Viscari sat in his office as the sun began to push pale gray light through the rain-blurred windows, and something uncomfortable settled into the space behind his sternum. A feeling he did not have a good word for, because the vocabulary he had built for himself over 44 years was not built for this kind of recognition. He had spent 7 years looking past his wife. He was only now beginning to understand what that had cost him. Downstairs in the greenhouse his wife had quietly made into her own space, the one room in the estate he never thought to enter. Amara Viscari sat among her pale orchids in the gray morning light, her hand resting on her stomach, her eyes open, her breathing controlled. She was not celebrating. She knew what was coming next. The Orlovs would eventually discover their operation had been exposed. Katerina would report back, or fail to report back, and Mikhail Orlov would know that something had shifted inside the Viscari house. Men like Mikhail did not simply accept the loss of an asset. They escalated. The documents were signed. Lyra's future was protected on paper, but paper had limits. What was coming next would require something more than documents. Amara's hand moved gently against the curve of her stomach. She looked at the orchids, white and precise and stubbornly alive in a house that had never really been hers. And she began to think about what came next. She had given Lucian the information about Katerina because he needed to know, and because knowing it changed the geometry of everything that was about to happen. What she had not told him, what she was not ready to tell him, was what she had found in his private bathroom. In the supplement capsules lined up precisely on the second shelf, the ones his doctor had prescribed, the ones he had been taking every morning for 6 months. She had sent one of them to a laboratory 3 weeks ago, under a name that did not exist, paying cash. The results had come back last week. And sitting in her greenhouse in the gray October morning, Amara Viscari understood with cold clarity that the war had not started tonight. It had been quietly underway for months, and her husband had been losing it without knowing he was in it. The greenhouse smelled like wet earth and something green and alive, which was the precise opposite of everything else inside the Viscari estate. Amara had planted the orchids herself 2 years earlier in the weeks after her second miscarriage, when she needed something to care for that would not ask her questions or require her to perform composure. The plants had no expectations. They responded to water and light and nothing else. She had found that arrangement easier than most of her human relationships. It was past 6 in the morning when Lucian found her there. He did not knock. He never knocked on doors inside his own house, which had always been a particular kind of statement. Not aggressive, just absolute. The casual assumption that every room belonged to him by default. But he stopped in the doorway of the greenhouse in a way he did not usually stop in doorways. And Amara noticed that before she noticed anything else about him. He looked like a man who had not slept. The jacket was gone, the sleeves rolled to the elbows. His eyes were the particular dark of someone who has been sitting alone with bad information for several hours. "Everything you told me," he said. "My people confirmed it. I know. All of it. Katerina Orlov, the identity, the routes she passed to her uncle." He stepped inside. The door swung shut behind him. 18 months. Yes. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the orchids, as if he needed somewhere else to put his eyes. "You should have told me. I told you last night. You should have told me 3 months ago." Amara set down the small watering can she had been holding. She turned to face him fully. "If I had told you 3 months ago, you would have gone to her immediately. You would not have been able to stop yourself. Not because you cared about her, but because that is how you respond to betrayal. Directly, visibly. And the moment you confronted her, she would have run. The Orlovs would have known their cover was burned, and they would have simply built a new one. a quieter one. She held his gaze. I needed the information to be complete before it was acted on. You understand strategy. Apply it. He was quiet for a moment. His jaw was working, which was the closest thing to visible agitation he usually displayed. You made a unilateral decision about a threat to my operation, he said. I made a decision about a threat to my child's father, she said, which is the same thing, but I made it for different reasons than you would have. He crossed to the wooden bench against the far wall and sat on it heavily, which surprised her. Lucien Vescari did not sit heavily anywhere. He occupied space with intention, always. This was something different. What do you want me to do with her? He asked. That's not my decision. I'm asking you anyway. Amara considered that for a moment. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The morning light was coming through the glass panels above them in long, pale stripes, and somewhere beyond the estate wall, the city was beginning to move. She doesn't know her cover is burned, Amara said. That's a resource. It won't last long. If you pull away from her suddenly, she'll sense it and report back. If you maintain contact carefully, you control what information the Orlovs receive for however long the window stays open. She paused. But I would not underestimate Mikhail Orlov's patience. He did not build what he built by being reactive. He will eventually notice something has changed, with or without Katerina's report. Lucien looked at her. You've thought about this more than I have. I've had 3 months. He rubbed the back of his neck. It was the first entirely unguarded gesture she had seen from him in 7 years. I need to know something, he said, and I need you to tell me straight. She waited. Is there anything else? He said. Anything else you know that I don't? Any other... He searched for the word, preparations you've made, that I should be aware of. Amara looked at him. She thought about the laboratory report folded inside the false bottom of the planting tray to her left, 3 feet from where Lucien was sitting. She thought about the supplement capsules and what the analysis had found inside them. She thought about the 6 months Lucien had been taking them and what the long-term dose would have been designed to do. Not kill quickly, nothing that obvious, but degrade. Steadily. Judgment, clarity, physical stability. Designed to make him look like a man who is losing his edge. Designed to make the men around him begin to question his leadership without being able to point to a cause. She thought about all of that. Not yet, she said. When there's something you need to act on, I'll tell you. It was not a lie, exactly. It was a sequencing decision. She needed to handle the capsules herself first, verify that she had fully neutralized the supply, and understand the complete scope of the poisoning before she handed him information that would make him volatile in ways she could not yet predict. Lucien studied her face. He was trying to read her. She knew what that looked like. The slight narrowing of the eyes, the weight of attention. She had learned to be unreadable a long time ago. He nodded eventually. All right. He stood up. He was halfway to the door when he stopped and turned back, one hand on the doorframe, and said, with a difficulty that was visible and clearly unfamiliar to him, "The child. Is everything... Are you..." "We're both fine," Amara said. He nodded again, and left. Amara stood alone among her orchids for a long moment after the door closed. Then she reached into the planting tray, lifted the false bottom, and took out the laboratory report. She looked at it for the 3rd time since it had arrived, though she had already memorized every line. Compound identified, a synthetic formulation consistent with gradual neurological disruption. Long-term exposure designed to produce symptoms indistinguishable from stress-induced cognitive decline. Time of full effect at current dosage, estimated 8 to 12 weeks from point of replacement, which meant Lucien had another 2 to 6 weeks of symptoms if she had not already intervened. She had replaced the capsules 3 weeks ago. All of them. With identical-looking supplements purchased from a different source, same brand, same dosage label. Katerina would report to her uncle that the operation was ongoing. Mikhail would expect to see increasing deterioration in Lucien's decision-making over the coming weeks. Instead, he was going to get the opposite. But there was a problem with that. When Lucien began to sharpen, when his judgment cleared and his instincts returned to full capacity, the Orlovs would eventually notice the discrepancy. And when they did, they would know the capsules had been swapped, which meant they would know someone inside the estate had identified the poisoning and intervened. That would change the threat calculation entirely. Amara folded the report and placed it inside her blouse, against her skin. She would move it to a more secure location later. Right now, she needed to think. She was still thinking 3 hours later when Dario Kessler knocked on the greenhouse door. Dario was Lucian's security chief, and of all the men inside the Viscari organization, he was the one Amara had spent the most time trying to accurately read. He was in his late 40s, gray at the temples, built like someone who had started out lean and then absorbed 20 years of managed violence into his frame. He was not cruel, which made him unusual. He was professional in the way that certain kinds of soldiers are professional, compartmentalized, effective, and capable of genuine loyalty to the people he considered worth the investment. Whether she was one of those people, Amara had never been entirely certain. "He wants you both at the Rainer Gala tonight," Dario said without preamble. "Full appearance. He thinks it's important to be visible." "He told me the same thing an hour ago," Amara said. "I'm aware." Dario didn't move. He was looking at her with the particular attention of someone who has been trained to notice the things people don't say. "You look like you're calculating something." "I'm always calculating something." "Yeah." He paused. "Mrs. Viscari, the thing he asked me to run on the Orlov woman last night, that came from you, didn't it? The information." She didn't answer immediately. "I'm not asking to report back," Dario said. "I'm asking because I've been trying to keep this man alive for 12 years. And if there are things moving in directions I can't see, I need to know the shape of it, even if I don't know the details." Amara looked at him for a long moment. Dario had one of those faces that was difficult to manipulate, not because he was suspicious by nature, but because he was patient. He would simply wait for the truth to become visible, the way hunters wait. "Katerina Orlov is going to try something tonight," Amara said. "At the gala. I don't know exactly what, but I know how Mikhail Orlov thinks. He won't wait. He's been running a quiet operation for 18 months, and he knows, or he will know soon, that the window is closing. He'll want a public move, something that damages Lucian's standing with the commission before Lucian can respond." "What kind of public move?" "Something that can't be answered with a gun," Amar said. "Orlov is smart. A shooting at a social event creates martyrs and galvanizes opposition. He wants to create doubt, undermine credibility, make the other families question whether Lucian is—" She paused, choosing the word carefully— "stable." Dario absorbed this. "You want me to run extra security tonight?" "I want you to be prepared for an attack that doesn't look like an attack," she said. "And I want you to stay close, not to him, to me." Something moved across Dario's face. Not surprise exactly, but a recalibration. "You think she'll come at you?" "I think she'll come at the most vulnerable point in the room," Amara said. "And tonight, in that ballroom, the most vulnerable point is a 6 months pregnant woman whose husband has spent 7 years making sure everyone knows she has no power." Dario was quiet for a moment. "Does he know you think this?" "He knows enough," Amar said. "Make sure the detail's in position before we arrive. And Dario, don't tell him I asked you to stay near me. He'll interpret it as weakness on my part, and tonight I can't afford for anyone in that room to see weakness." Dario looked at her for one more long beat. Then he nodded once, the way men nod when they've made a decision they're not entirely comfortable with but can find no rational argument against. "Yes, ma'am," he said. It was the first time he had ever addressed her that way. The Rainer Gala was held in the ballroom of Dominic Rainer's city estate, a converted 19th century bank building with marble floors and ceilings high enough to make every conversation feel simultaneously private and exposed. Dominic Rainer was 63, patriarch of the second largest family on the East Coast, and he hosted this particular event every October, a charity auction that served the dual purpose of demonstrating civic legitimacy and providing an environment in which business could be conducted with the plausible deniability of social occasion. Every significant family sent representation. Several sent their principals. Lucian and Amara arrived at 9:15. Amara wore a deep midnight blue dress that accommodated her pregnancy without concealing it. She had made that choice deliberately, because walking into that room as a visibly pregnant woman was a different kind of statement than the one she had been making for 7 years. She wore her hair up. One piece of jewelry, a thin gold bracelet on her left wrist that had belonged to her mother, and which she touched occasionally without realizing she was doing it. Lucian walked beside her rather than ahead of her, which she noticed. She did not know if it was a decision or a reflex, but she filed it. The room was the particular temperature of wealthy people performing ease. Champagne in long-stemmed glasses. A string quartet positioned near the windows. Men in dark suits conducting the specific kind of conversation that looks like small talk but carries the weight of real negotiation. Women who were mostly decorative, mostly ignored, and in several cases, Amara knew this because she had spent years looking carefully at the rooms other people stopped looking at, considerably more alert than their companions. Dominic Rayner found them within 5 minutes of their arrival. He was a broad man with a white beard he kept trimmed to a particular length, and he had the politician's gift of making physical contact feel like an honor rather than an imposition. He gripped Lucian's hand. He smiled warmly at Amara and said something about the pregnancy that was meant to be kind, and which Amara accepted with the appropriate expression. When Dominic moved on, Lucian spoke quietly near her ear. "Orlov has people in this room." "I know," Amara said. "3 of them. The man at the East Bar, the woman near the auction display talking to Carmine Russo's son, and the waiter with the close-cropped hair who's been walking the same circuit since we arrived." Lucian said nothing for a moment. "Which one is Katerina?" "She's not here yet." He went still. "You're certain she's coming?" "She'll want to watch," Amara said. "Whatever she's planned for tonight, she'll want to be present for it." The auction began at 10. Items moved through the room. Art, travel packages, experiences, while the real business of the evening continued in the margins. Amara moved carefully through the space, accepting water when offered, maintaining the performance of a woman who was present because her husband required it and had nothing more complicated than that in her head. She was watching the room the way she had watched every room for 7 years. Patiently, completely. Katerina walked in at 10:20. She was exactly as described, dark-haired, precisely composed, with the kind of physical confidence that came from years of being trained to inhabit spaces where one wrong movement could turn lethal. She was dressed in red, which Amara noted was either boldness or a mistake, and she moved directly toward the auction area with the focused calm of someone on a schedule. Amara touched Dario's arm once. He was already watching. The mistake came at 10:40, during the auction of a waterfront property whose proceeds were nominally directed toward a harbor restoration project. The room's attention was on the auctioneer. Most people were looking forward. Katerina moved to the microphone. She did not take it by force. She simply materialized beside the auctioneer with the kind of quiet authority that in a room full of powerful people was generally assumed to be legitimate until proven otherwise. By the time the auctioneer registered that something was wrong, Katerina was already speaking. "I apologize for interrupting," she said, her voice clear and controlled, pitched to carry across the marble and the high ceiling. "But there is a matter that directly concerns several people in this room, and I believe in the interest of transparency and of the Commission's integrity. It should be addressed immediately." The string quartet stopped, not because anyone told them to, because the temperature of the room changed. "I have had a DNA analysis conducted," Katerina said, "at an independent laboratory concerning the child currently being carried by Amara Viscari." She paused, letting the silence do its work. "The analysis indicates that Lucian Viscari is not the biological father." The ballroom went the particular quiet of a room full of dangerous people who are deciding what to do with information. Every head turned. Not all to Katerina, most to Lucian. Amara felt the weight of it. She was standing 8 feet from where she had been standing when the announcement was made, and she felt, in that precise moment, 50 pairs of eyes calibrating her, not as a person, but as a data point. Was she the instrument of someone's manipulation? Was Lucian being undermined from inside his own house? Was the child a symbol of his control or evidence of his failure? The room was making the calculation she had spent years trying to prevent anyone from making. Lucian's voice came out controlled and very quiet. "I want a public test." It was the wrong answer. She knew it immediately. A demand for a DNA test, however reasonable, created a spectacle. It placed the question formally into the record of the evening. It meant that for the next 48 hours, while results were pending, the story circulating through the commission would be Lucian Vescari's paternity was in doubt. That was exactly what Katerina wanted. Amara walked to the microphone. She did not rush. She moved with the particular deliberateness of someone who intends for every step to be read correctly, and she felt the room track her as she went. Dario was 3 paces behind her, not visible enough to look like an escort, close enough to matter if something went wrong. She reached the microphone. She looked at Katerina directly, and then she turned to face the room. "The evidence Ms. Cross has presented," Amara said. She used the stolen name precisely and without emphasis, describes a DNA analysis drawn from fetal material, which would require either an amniocentesis or a chorionic villus sampling procedure. She paused. "I have not undergone either procedure. My obstetrician can confirm this. There is no fetal DNA to have analyzed, which means the document she is presenting was constructed from material that does not exist." She let that settle for exactly 2 seconds, which raises a more immediate question about who constructed it and why, and at whose instruction. She reached into the small clutch she had been carrying all evening. She removed 2 folded pages, printed that afternoon at the apartment, transferred to her bag by a route that did not go through the main house, and held them up. "Vivian Cross," Amara said, "is the operating alias of Katerina Orlov, niece of Mikhail Orlov of the St. Petersburg network, who has been running an intelligence operation inside the Vescari organization for 18 months. She looked at the assembled faces, the commission heads, their lieutenants, the wives who were paying far more attention than their husbands realized. "The documentation I'm holding includes financial transfers from the Orlov network to 3 accounts maintained under Ms. Cross's identity. Identity verification records cross-referenced with a deceased Slovak national, and intercepted communication logs." Katerina's composure was extraordinary, but something had shifted behind her eyes. "She came here tonight," Amara said, "because her operation has a closing window. She knew exposure was coming, and she chose to attempt preemptive damage. That should tell you something about the current state of the Orlov network's confidence in their position." She stepped back from the microphone. The room began to talk. Not to her, to each other, the low, urgent murmur of people reevaluating, recategorizing, shifting their understanding of what the last 18 months had contained. Katerina moved toward the exit. Dario was already blocking it, not physically. He was standing near it, casually, in a way that would require deliberate confrontation to get past. He was watching her with the patient attention of someone who has been waiting for a specific moment. Katerina evaluated the exit, evaluated Dario, and made the calculation. She stopped. And for one moment, one very brief, entirely unguarded moment, she looked at Amara across the crowded ballroom with something that was not quite admiration and not quite hatred, but existed in the precise, uncomfortable territory between the two. Amara looked back at her without expression. It appeared, from the outside, that the crisis had been managed. The fabricated evidence had been neutralized. Katerina's identity had been burned publicly, in front of the commission, in a way that served as both protection and warning. The alliance of families that Mikhail Orlov had been trying to fracture was, for this moment, intact. That was what it looked like from the outside. Amara knew better. She felt it before the message reached Lucian's phone. A shift in the posture of one of Dario's men near the main entrance. A fractional change in the quality of attention in the room that had nothing to do with the drama at the microphone. Something was happening somewhere else. Lucian's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. The color changed in his face in a way she had never seen before. He crossed to her in 6 steps. "The estate," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear it. "We need to go. Now." "What happened?" "Armed entry, multiple teams. They hit while we were here." He looked at her with something that was not anger and was not fear, but was somewhere between them, operating at a frequency she had never heard from him before. "They took everything from your office. Computers, files, everything." Amara felt something drop through her stomach. Not panic, she did not panic, but a cold, clear understanding of what had just happened landed in her chest like a stone. They had been moved. While Katerina occupied the room, while Amara was standing at a microphone successfully dismantling the false evidence. Another team had been inside the estate. Systematic. Targeted. They had not gone for the weapons rooms or the money safes. They had gone specifically for her office, her archives, her evidence, the copies she had not yet moved to the distributed locations, the physical documents she had been in the process of securing over the past 3 weeks, the records that backed everything she had presented to Lucian and everything she had held in reserve for contingencies she hadn't yet needed. The gala was not an attack. The gala was a distraction. The warehouses, Dario said, appearing at Lucian's shoulder, reading something on his own phone. His voice was flat and entirely controlled, which was how she knew it was bad. 3 of them. Simultaneous, the one on the waterfront and both storage facilities in the warehouse district. He looked up. They're burning. Amara looked at the exit, then at Katerina, who was still standing near the wall, hemmed in by Dario's man, and who was now looking at her phone with an expression that was almost, not quite, but almost, surprised, which meant the attack had already been in motion before Katerina's exposure. The timing had been set before tonight. The burning warehouses and the raid on the estate were not a response to what had happened at the gala. They were always going to happen tonight, with or without the DNA stunt, with or without Katerina's cover being burned. Mikhail Orlov had already decided. This wasn't an escalation. This was the beginning of something they had already been inside of without knowing it. Amara turned to Lucian. She held his eyes. She said 2 words, very quietly. "Take me home." He nodded. They moved through the ballroom, and the room parted for them. Not out of deference exactly, but out of the particular awareness that moves through a crowd when something is happening that everyone can sense, but no one yet fully understands. Dominic Rayner watched them go from across the room with an expression that was difficult to read. The commission heads watched. The men in dark suits tracked the movement. The car moved through the city in the direction of the estate. Amara sat in the back seat with her hands in her lap and her eyes forward, and she thought about the archive. She thought about what had been in it and what had not been in it, and she ran the calculation with the particular cold focus she had been building for 7 years, separating what was salvageable from what was gone. The physical copies were gone. She had known this risk, and she had not moved fast enough, and that was a mistake she would not have the luxury of making twice. But there were things Mikhail Orlov did not know about. The digital architecture she had built under names that had no connection to her. The encrypted accounts in 3 separate jurisdictions. The testimony of a man named Noel Barron, kept in a location she had never written down anywhere. Those were still intact. But when the car turned onto the estate road and she saw the glow through the trees, orange and flickering, wrong, deeply wrong, she understood that the calculation had just become significantly more complicated. The house was on fire. Not burning to the ground, but burning. The East Wing, where her office was, where her greenhouse was, where 7 years of her life had been housed inside the walls of a place that had never entirely belonged to her. Black smoke climbing into the October night sky, her orchids burning with everything else. Lucian was out of the car before it stopped. Amara sat in the back seat for 3 seconds longer. She placed her hand on her stomach. She breathed. Then she got out. The security chief was running toward them, and the first words out of his mouth were about casualties and perimeter breach and the asset compromised by the inside codes. Someone had given the attackers the inside security codes, and Lucian was already in motion, already making the calls, already becoming the version of himself that operated on pure command instinct. Amara looked at the burning East Wing. She thought about what Mikhail Orlov had just told them, without saying a word. He had not sent a message to Lucian. He had sent it to her. He knew. He had known, somehow, through some channel she had not yet identified, that she was the one who had been mapping his operation. He had not burned the weapons rooms or the financial offices. He had burned her space, her files, her work. The move was surgical in a way that brute attacks never were, which meant the inside leak was not just a security code. It was someone who knew the shape of what Amara had been doing inside this house. Someone who had been close enough to know which threat was actually worth destroying. Dario appeared at her elbow. His face was tight. He was watching the fire with the eyes of a man doing rapid and unfavorable arithmetic. We need to move you to a secondary location, he said. Tonight, not tomorrow. Right now. I know, Amara said. There's an apartment, he began. I know about the apartment, she said. I own it. She looked at him and watched his face absorb that. Get Lucian. We're leaving in 10 minutes. Bring nothing from the house except what he's wearing. He won't. Tell him his wife said so, Amara said. Tell him I said we have maybe 40 minutes before whoever did this confirms the target didn't go down with the building, and after that the timeline changes. She turned toward the car. And Dario, somewhere in this security team, there is a person who gave the Orlovs the entry codes tonight. I need you to understand that before you decide who you trust in the next 10 minutes. Dario went very still. Yes, she said quietly. That's what I said. She got back in the car. The fire crackled and spat orange light across the gravel and the manicured lawn and the iron gates. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, the city moved through its ordinary night, oblivious. Inside the car, Amara Viscari sat with her hand on her stomach and her eyes on the burning wing of the house she had never called home, and she understood that the line she had been standing on, the careful, strategic, invisible line between managing a situation and being consumed by it, had just been crossed. There was no going back to the greenhouse, no going back to the orchids, to the careful patience, to the position of the woman who watched and waited and prepared. The Orlovs had just told her that watching and waiting was no longer available as a strategy. She was in it now, fully, irrevocably, without the shelter of invisibility. And somewhere inside the compressed fear and the cold clarity and the hand pressed against the movement of her unborn daughter, Amara Viscari felt something that surprised her. She was not afraid of what came next. She was afraid that what came next would be decided by people who still did not fully understand what she was capable of. That needed to change. Tonight. The apartment was on the 7th floor of a building that looked, from the outside, like every other mid-rise in the financial district. Unremarkable brick, ground-floor dry cleaner, a mailbox cluster in the lobby that nobody checked. Amara had purchased it 14 months ago through a company registered in Delaware, under a name she had selected specifically because it sounded boring. Property management. The kind of entity that existed in the background of 1,000 transactions and attracted the attention of no one. She had furnished it herself, in cash, over 3 separate visits. Nothing expensive, a couch, a bed, a table with 4 chairs, a refrigerator she had stocked twice, a safe behind a panel in the bedroom closet, combination known to no one, a laptop that had never been connected to any network associated with the Viscari estate, prepaid, anonymous. Useful in exactly the way it was being used right now. They arrived at 11:50. Lucian said nothing in the elevator. He stood with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the floor indicator, and he had the look of a man who was processing too much in the wrong order. Anger trying to organize itself around information that kept shifting, betrayal trying to locate a clean target in a room full of mirrors. Dario was behind them both, his phone already out, already making calls in a voice too low to read. Inside the apartment, Amara went directly to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and stood at the counter drinking it while Lucian moved through the 3 rooms with the automatic habit of a man assessing perimeters. Old instinct. He checked the windows, he checked the fire exit. He came back to the main room and stood in the middle of it and looked at her. This place has been here for over a year, he said. Yes. You never mentioned it. No. He looked at the walls, the furniture, the spare and functional way she had arranged it all. You built an exit, he said. I built a workspace, she said. The exit was incidental. She set down the glass. Sit down, Lucian, both of you. Dario came out of the hallway where he had been finishing his calls. He sat. Lucian did not. He remained standing with one hand on the back of a chair, which was as close as he was going to get to following her direction, and she accepted it. What we know, Amara said. The East Wing is burned. My physical archives are gone. The copies I had not yet moved. 3 warehouses are destroyed. The entry teams used codes that could only have come from someone inside the perimeter security structure. She looked at Dario. How many people had access to the full code rotation from this month? 12, Dario said. He said it without hesitation, which meant he had already been running the list in his head. But the codes used tonight, the ones that got the teams through the secondary checkpoint, those were from a subset. 6 people had access to that specific rotation. Names. Dario looked at Lucien. Old habit. The reflex to check with the principal before disclosing to anyone else, even the principal's wife. Amara watched Lucien give a single short nod, and she watched Dario absorb the shift in that exchange without comment. "Pharaoh," Dario said. "Marco Vale. Yourself." He looked at Lucien. "Reed Macon, Sal Prieto, and myself." Silence. Lucien took his hand off the chair. "That's a short list." "It is." "Pharaoh has been with me for 9 years." "Yes." "Marco Vale has been with me for 11. "Yes," Dario said again. Lucien looked at Amara. She looked back at him. She was not going to say what came next. This was his organization, these were his men, and there were certain conclusions that needed to arrive through his own reasoning rather than being handed to him. Men like Lucien did not accept delivered conclusions about their own inner circle. They needed to reach them through a path that felt like their own. "Reed Macon," Lucien said. He said it quietly, like a name he was testing the weight of. Dario said nothing. "Reed has been talking to Dominic Rayner's people for the last 2 months," Lucien said. "I knew that. I was watching it. I thought it was passive intelligence gathering. Reed likes to keep his options positioned. He's done it before. I didn't think he was—" He stopped. "He may not have known what the codes were being used for," Dario said carefully. "He may have sold them as access tools to someone he thought was a Rayner asset, not knowing the end buyer was Orloff." "That is a generous interpretation," Amara said. "It's the interpretation that keeps us from making a move on the wrong person in the wrong order," Dario said. He looked at her directly when he said it, and she recognized the quality of it. Not pushback exactly, but professional constraint. He was good at his job. She needed to remember that even when his caution frustrated her. "What do you need to confirm it?" she asked. 24 hours and access to Reed's communications." "You have 12 hours, Lucien said. His voice had changed. The processing quality was gone. He was back inside the register she recognized as operational. Flat, precise, no bandwidth allocated to feeling. "Whatever you need to pull the communications, do it. I want the confirmation before morning." Dario nodded and stepped back into the hallway with his phone. Amara moved to the bedroom closet. She opened the panel. The safe was a small digital model, gray, nothing remarkable about it except what was inside. She entered the combination with her back partially to the door. Not entirely, because she did not fully close doors when Lucien was on the other side of them. Not yet. Not with 3 months of fragile and very new recalibration between them. And she removed 3 items: a USB drive, a folded document, and a small orange prescription bottle with a pharmacy label that had a name on it that was not hers. She carried them to the table. Lucien had moved to the window. He was looking out at the city, hands clasped behind his back, and he turned when he heard her set the items on the table. He looked at the prescription bottle. "Sit down," she said again. This time he did. She sat across from him. She placed her hands flat on the table on either side of the 3 objects, and she looked at him, and she felt the particular weight of a conversation she had been rehearsing for 3 weeks and had not been ready to have until now. "This came from your bathroom," she said. She touched the prescription bottle. "Second shelf, your morning supplement, the one Dr. Wren prescribed for fatigue and cognitive support after your blood work in April." Lucien frowned. "What about it?" 3 weeks ago, I removed a capsule from this bottle and sent it to an independent laboratory under a false name." She paused. "The analysis came back positive for a synthetic compound, gradual onset, designed to produce progressive neurological disruption, difficulty concentrating, impaired judgment, mood instability, physical fatigue, at a rate slow enough to be indistinguishable from stress-related decline." Lucien stared at the bottle. He did not speak for a long moment. She watched his face, the particular stillness that preceded something significant in him, the way a surface goes glassy before what is moving beneath it becomes visible. "You're telling me," he said. "I'm telling you the supplements were poisoned," she said. "Not lethally, not immediately. The compound is designed for a long-duration effect, At the dosage they were delivering, the full cognitive impact would have been realized in 8 to 12 weeks from the time of first exposure. When did I start taking them? April, 6 months ago. He said nothing. You've had symptoms, Amar said. It was not a question. She had watched it. The moments at dinner when he lost the thread of a sentence, the irritation that came faster and lasted longer than it used to. The 2 occasions she had observed him read the same page of a document twice without appearing to register it. She had watched all of it and said nothing because she was still confirming, still building the case with the care that made her conclusions reliable rather than reactive. I thought it was the workload, Lucian said. His voice was very controlled. Too controlled. The kind of control that was costing him something. I know. I told Ren about the concentration issues in July. He said it was expected. He said the supplements would help. He looked at the bottle, then back at her. Ren. I don't know yet, Amar said. It could be that his prescription was intercepted and replaced at the pharmacy level. It could be that someone in the household substituted the capsules after delivery. It could be that Ren is complicit. I don't have confirmation of the vector yet. She held his eyes. What I know is that 3 weeks ago, when I replaced every capsule in that bottle with a clean alternative, I stopped the delivery. You've been clean for 21 days. Lucian was quiet. She could see him doing the arithmetic, mapping the symptoms against the timeline, cross-referencing the decisions he had made in the last 6 months against the question of whether his judgment had been operating at full capacity when he made them. She could see him arriving at conclusions she had already arrived at weeks ago, and she watched his face absorb them one by one. The Baltimore meeting, he said. August. The commission vote in September. I read that room wrong. I knew I read it wrong. I walked out of there, and I couldn't account for why I had missed it. He stopped. His hands, flat on the table, were very still. The deal with the Caruso network. I gave up too much. I knew at the time something was off in my calculations, and I couldn't locate it. Yes, Amara said. 6 months, he said. They've had 6 months of me operating at what? What percentage? I don't know, she said honestly. Neurological disruption compounds vary in their impact by individual, but the design intent was significant deterioration. The Orlovs needed you to appear to be losing your edge without anyone being able to point to a specific cause. They needed the men around you to begin questioning your leadership naturally without a clear event they could identify as the trigger. Make the king look weak, Lucian said. From the inside, yes. He stood up. Not abruptly. He pushed back from the table with a deliberateness that was worse than abruptness, because it was the movement of someone who has just understood the full shape of something and needs to be upright in order to hold it. He walked to the window again. His back was to her. You've known for 3 weeks, he said. Yes. You replaced the capsules 3 weeks ago. Yes. And you said nothing. I needed to secure the evidence first. I needed to confirm the compound independently, and I needed... She paused, and this was the part she had rehearsed less, because it was the part that was true in a way that was difficult to package neatly. I needed to understand what you would do with the information before I gave it to you. Because if you had gone after Katerina in the 3 weeks since I found this, while the estate was still vulnerable and the archive was still centralized, you would have accelerated their timeline, and we would have ended up exactly here, but without the signed transfer documents, and without the gala exposure, and without the insurance I was building. Silence. You sequenced me, he said. I protected our daughter, she said. The sequencing was in service of that. He turned around. His face was the particular kind of control that she now recognized as the outer edge of something that could go in any direction, and she met it without moving. I'm not your variable, he said. I'm not a piece on your board that you move when the timing is right and hold in place when it isn't. I know, she said. 3 weeks, he said. Someone has been poisoning me in my own house, and you held that for 3 weeks. Yes. That is not... He stopped. He turned his face away. She watched the muscles in his jaw work. That is not something I can just receive and file away, Amara. You understand that? I do, she said. I'm not asking you to file it away. I'm asking you to understand why I made the decision I made, And then I'm asking you to decide what we do next. Because right now, in this room, we have a breach in your inner circle, a burned archive, a poisoning operation that may or may not still have active vectors we haven't identified, and a commission that watched the Rainer Gala tonight and is currently deciding whether the Viscari organization is stable enough to stand behind. She let that land. We have approximately 6 hours before the arithmetic of this city works against us. Lucian looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "What is the Noel Barron testimony?" Amara went still, not visibly. She did not allow visible stillness, it communicated too much. But inside something went cold and precise, the same thing that happened whenever a variable appeared in a calculation without warning. "Where did you hear that name?" she said. Lucian's eyes changed. "You just answered my question," he said. "Who is Noel Barron, Amara?" She held his gaze for 3 seconds, long enough to make the decision cleanly rather than reactively. "A witness," she said. "To the Orlov Network's killing of Commissioner Hale 18 months ago. They paid a mechanic to sabotage the brake system on Hale's car. I found the mechanic. I've been protecting him." Lucian went very still. "Hale's death was ruled an accident. It was engineered to look like one. And you found the man who did it?" "Yes." "And you've been protecting him for how long?" 8 months. He turned away from her, walked the length of the room and came back. She watched him do it, back and forth once, and then he stopped in front of the table and put both hands on it and leaned forward and said, "How many other things are there, Amara? How many other things are you holding that I don't know about?" She thought about what an honest answer to that question looked like. The full answer was complicated, not because she was hiding malice, but because the architecture of what she had built over 7 years was layered in ways that did not reduce neatly to a list. There were contingencies she had prepared that she had never needed to activate. There were accounts and contacts and arrangements that existed at varying levels of readiness. There were things that were relevant right now and things that would only become relevant in specific future scenarios. "The things that are relevant tonight," she said, "are on this table." She touched the USB drive. "This contains the distributed digital archive. The documents backing the financial evidence are on 3 encrypted servers in 3 jurisdictions. I have the access credentials memorized. Nothing is written down anywhere." She touched the folded document. "This is a transcript of Noel Barron's testimony, recorded and notarized by an attorney who does not know who hired her. The original recording is in a safe deposit box in a bank Noel chose himself, in a city I will not name in this room until we've confirmed the security of this location." She looked at Lucian. "Those are your weapons. They're intact. Everything they burned tonight was physical paper. The substance is still there." Lucian straightened up. He looked at the table. Then he looked at her. Really looked, the way he had begun doing in the last 24 hours, which was different from how he had looked at her for 7 years. Less like a man surveying property and more like a man reading a document he was only now realizing was written in a language he had never learned. "The Barron testimony," he said. "If we bring that to the commission, proof that Orlov ordered Hale's killing." "The commission turns," Amara said. "Hale was respected. He was neutral, and he was respected, and the families that admired him have been suspicious of his accident since it happened. They have not said so publicly because they had no alternative explanation to attach the suspicion to." She paused. "Give them one, and they will move." "We need to call a meeting." "We need to call a meeting," she agreed. "But not tonight. Tonight we need to confirm the leak in your security. And we need to do one other thing first." She looked at him. "We need to find Noel Barron and move him. Right now. Tonight." "Why tonight specifically?" "Because the name you just said, Noel Barron, you heard it somewhere before you walked into this room. And I need to know where and from whom and how recently." She held his eyes. "Because if that name has surfaced outside this apartment, then someone who knows about the testimony has already decided to remove the witness." Lucian's jaw tightened. He reached for his phone. Amara said, "Don't call from that phone. Use the one in the top drawer of that cabinet. Prepaid, not associated with anything." He looked at her. Then he crossed to the cabinet, opened the drawer, and found the phone exactly where she said it would be. He looked at it for a moment, The plain, cheap device, the kind nobody looks at twice, and something crossed his face that she could not entirely categorize. Some confluence of humiliation and respect and anger that had not yet decided which one was going to win. He picked it up. He started to dial. That was when Dario came out of the hallway, and his face was wrong in a way Amara registered before he said a single word. Gray, set, the face of someone carrying information they already know will cause damage and have no way to soften. Reed Macon, Dario said. Confirmed? Lucian asked. Confirmed. He's been passing information to an Orlov-connected intermediary for 4 months, but that's not... Dario stopped. He looked at Amara, looked at Lucian. He seemed for one uncharacteristic moment to be deciding whether to say the next part. Dario, Amara said quietly. The name Noel Barron, Dario said. It was in Reed's communications. He passed it 3 days ago, with the location attached. The room went quiet. Amara felt it move through her. Not panic, she did not do panic, but the particular sensation of a calculation arriving at a catastrophic result in the space between one heartbeat and the next. 3 days. Reed had passed the name 3 days ago, which meant the Orlovs had known about Noel Barron for 72 hours, which meant they had had 3 days to locate a mechanic in a small repair shop in a city she had not named because she had believed the information was secure, because she had told no one the location, because the only way Reed Macon could have obtained that information was... She looked at Dario. How did Reed get the name? She asked. Her voice was very level. Dario's face did something difficult. It came from a communication 6 weeks ago, he said. Inside the estate. From your computer, Mrs. Vescari. Your personal machine, the one in your office. He paused. The one that burned tonight. She looked at the table, at the USB drive, and the folded document and the prescription bottle, and her hands flat on either side of all of it. Her personal computer. The machine she had used to draft the notarization request for Noel's testimony, in a file she had encrypted and which she had believed was accessible only from within the device itself. But she had been connected to the estate network that day. She remembered it precisely now. A connectivity issue with the standalone machine that had required a temporary network bridge. A single afternoon, she had judged it acceptable risk because the file was encrypted and the session was brief. Someone had been inside the estate network with enough sophistication to pull an encrypted file from a bridged device during a narrow window 6 weeks ago. Not Reed Macon. Reed was not that sophisticated. He was a leak, not an engineer. Someone else had pulled it and passed it to Reed. Or passed it directly to the Orlovs, and Reed had simply been the conduit that got caught because he was the obvious one, which meant there was a second access point, one she had not identified, one that was not on Dario's list of 6. Call the safe house, Amara said, the number I gave you for emergencies. She was already moving toward the prepaid phone she kept in the kitchen drawer, the one with a single contact stored in it. Call it now, Dario. Dario was already dialing. He held the phone to his ear. She watched his face. He listened for 4 seconds, then he lowered the phone. No answer, he said. Try again. He did. Same result. Amara stood very still. Her hand found the edge of the counter without her meaning it to. She pressed her fingertips against the cold laminate, and she breathed through the next 3 seconds with the focus of someone who cannot afford to do anything other than remain functional. Noel Barron, 61 years old, a mechanic with soft hands and nervous eyes who had watched a commission leader die on a rainy highway because someone had paid him $200,000 and told him no one would ever know. Who had spent 18 months carrying the weight of it, and who had agreed, finally, to say what he knew because Amara had sat across from him in a diner booth for 2 hours and told him, honestly, without performance, that silence was no longer going to protect him. He had trusted her. She had believed the location was secure. We have to go, Amara said. You are not going anywhere tonight, Lucian said. You're 6 months pregnant, and someone just burned our house. We have to go, she said again, and there was something in her voice that stopped him. Not volume, the opposite. The particular quality of complete stillness that meant the decision had already been made in a place he could not reach by arguing. If Noel is gone, the testimony is gone. And without the testimony, We cannot prove the Orlovs killed Hale, and without that, the commission will not move. And without the commission, we are two people in a borrowed apartment with a burned archive, a list of digital evidence that will take weeks to reconstruct into a usable form, and an inner circle that has been compromised at the access level. She looked at him. We need Noel alive. He is the only piece that cannot be rebuilt. Lucian stared at her. He turned to Dario. Get the car, he said. Dario went. Amara went to the bedroom and retrieved the safe's remaining contents. A second USB drive, a passport under a different name, and a folded piece of paper with a handwritten address she had never entered into any device. The only copy. The location of Noel Barron's safe house, written in her own hand, known to no one. She folded the paper and put it in her pocket and came back to the main room. Lucian was standing at the door. He looked at her in a way she had not seen from him before. Not the assessing look, not the performance of command, not even the version of looking that had begun 2 days ago. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has badly misjudged and is not yet certain how to account for. If he's already gone, Lucian said, and he did not finish the sentence. Then we find another way, Amara said. Is there another way? She looked at him, and for the first time since she had walked into his office with 2 folders and her hands flat on his desk, Amara Vescari did not immediately have an answer. She put her hand on the door handle. Outside, Dario's footsteps were already coming back up the stairwell, quick and purposeful, and the city was moving in its ordinary darkness below the windows. And somewhere in that city, in a repair shop on a street she had memorized and never written down, a frightened man who had trusted her was either alive or he was not. And the difference between those 2 outcomes was the difference between a war they could still win and one that had already been decided without their knowledge. She opened the door. And Lucian Vescari, the most feared man on the East Coast, who had built an empire on the assumption that everything around him could be controlled, followed his wife into the hallway without saying another word, because he had finally understood something that should have been obvious years earlier. In this particular fight, she was not the person who needed protecting. She was the person doing the protecting. And right now, the thing she was trying to protect was the last piece of leverage they had left in the hands of a man she had promised safety to, and the promise was 3 days closer to being broken than she had known until 60 seconds ago. The repair shop was on a street that smelled like diesel and standing water, 3 blocks from a freight rail line that ran cargo through the industrial quarter twice a night. Amara had chosen it for that reason, the train's masked sound. A man living quietly under a false name needed the city to be louder than he was, and this particular corner of it was loud enough. The car moved through the streets without headlights for the final 2 blocks. Dario's decision. Nobody argued it. Amara had the folded paper in her left hand, though she no longer needed it. She had memorized the address months ago. She held it anyway, a habit from a woman who trusted written confirmation over memory in moments when the stakes made memory unreliable. She pressed her right hand flat against her thigh and felt her daughter move once, a small interior pressure, and she breathed through it without changing her expression. Lucian was beside her in the back seat. He had not spoken for 11 minutes. She knew because she had been counting, not obsessively, but as a way of tracking her own steadiness, the way a person counts steps when they need to keep moving and can't afford to think about the distance. Dario pulled the car to a stop half a block from the shop. Dark. The shop was dark. That was the first thing. The lights were supposed to be on. Noel kept a workbench light burning through the night. He had told her it made the place look occupied without drawing attention, the passive mimicry of a man still working late. She had agreed that it was a sensible precaution. She had specifically noted it as a sign of life indicator. No light. Stay here, Dario said. No, Amara said. Mrs. Vescari. If he's in there and he's frightened, he will not open a door for 2 men he doesn't know. He will open it for me. She looked at Dario. Stay close. That's the arrangement. Dario looked at Lucian. Lucian said nothing. She did not wait for the exchange to resolve. She opened the car door and stepped out into the cold street before either of them could construct a functional objection. The air was sharp and still smelled of the earlier rain. Her heels were wrong for this street, wrong for this situation, Still correct for the gala she had left 3 hours ago that now felt like it belonged to a different week. She walked without hesitating because hesitation on a dark street was a signal, and she was done sending signals she hadn't chosen. Dario was 2 paces behind her. Then Lucian, one hand at his side, the other loose near the jacket he had closed against the cold. The shop's front door was metal, industrial gray, with a mail slot at the bottom and a small window at eye level covered with frosted plastic. She pressed her palm against the door. It moved. Not open, not swinging freely, but it moved. The way a door moves when the lock has been disengaged and the door has been pulled almost shut but not sealed. She looked at Dario. He stepped in front of her. She let him, not because she was afraid, but because the arrangement made tactical sense, and she had no interest in heroism that served her ego over the objective. Dario pushed the door open with his foot, hand on his weapon, and went in low and fast with the particular efficiency of a man who has done this in real circumstances and not in practice scenarios. 3 seconds. "Clear," he said. "Come in." The smell hit her before her eyes adjusted to the dark. Oil, metal, and beneath those familiar repair shop smells, something copper and wrong. She stood in the doorway and let her vision calibrate. Workbench along the left wall. Hydraulic lift in the center, a car raised on it. Mid-process, the undercarriage partially disassembled. Tool cabinet along the right wall, drawers open. Not ransacked exactly. Opened, searched, replaced without care. Noel was in the back room. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the rear wall, and he was alive. And the relief of that moved through Amara so hard and fast that she had to take one very controlled breath before she could move toward him. He was alive, but he had been worked over by someone who knew what they were doing. Left eye swollen to a bruised slit. A cut along his jaw that had bled significantly and was beginning to crust. He was holding his right hand against his chest with the particular protective curling of someone whose fingers have been deliberately bent the wrong way. He looked up when she came in and he said, "Mrs. A," which was what he had always called her, and his voice was hoarse. She crouched in front of him, which was not easy at 6 months, but she did it, and she put her hand on his shoulder and she said, "Who was here?" "2 men, maybe 40 minutes ago." He swallowed. "They wanted to know if I'd made copies of what I told you." "What did you say?" "I said no." He looked at her with his one functional eye. "I said no, and they were persuasive about asking again." "Did they take anything?" "They took the recording." He exhaled, a broken sound. "The backup drive I kept under the lift. They found it." Amara stayed very still. "The recording was a backup of which version?" "The first session, the one we did in September. Not the November follow-up." "No." He shook his head carefully, like a man testing for damage. "The November one. I never put that on a drive. You told me not to. I kept it." He touched the left side of his chest with the hand he could still extend. "I kept it up here. What you told me to do." She looked at him for a moment. "Can you still say it, in front of witnesses?" He looked back at her with the particular expression of a man who is very tired and in genuine pain and who is looking at the one person in this situation who has, up to this point, delivered on what she promised. "You said I'd be safe," he said. "You're alive," she said. "I'm sorry it's cost you this much. I need to know if you can still testify." A long pause. Dario and Lucian were behind her, and she was aware of them as a kind of pressure at her back, and she did not turn to acknowledge it. This moment belonged to her and Noel. "What happens to me after?" Noel asked. "A new name," she said. "A new city. Funded for 5 years. It's already arranged." "You arranged that before you knew if I'd agree." "Yes." "Why?" "Because I believed you would," she said, "and because you deserved the arrangement regardless of what you decided." Noel Barron looked at the ceiling of his small back room for a moment. He was 61 years old, and he had the hands of a man who had spent his life fixing things and had made one very bad decision under financial pressure and had been carrying it ever since. He looked like he had been carrying it. The weight of it had been doing something to him, and she could see that, and she was not going to pretend she couldn't. "All right," he said. She helped him stand, His right hand was usable at the wrist, but he could not extend the fingers, and she did not look at them too carefully because there was nothing she could do about them right now. And looking too carefully would make her angry in a way she could not afford. Lucian moved past her. He crouched where she had been crouching, and he looked at Noel for a moment. The old man, the mechanic, the reluctant witness. And he said, "I'm Lucian Vescari." Noel looked at him. "I know who you are. You have information that can end a war tonight. Your wife already asked me. I'm asking you again, as the man whose name is on the door." A pause. "I want you to know who's making the promise." Noel looked at him for a long moment. "You're not who I expected," the old man said. Lucian said nothing. "She talked about you," Noel said. "Not kindly, mostly, in the early days." He looked at Amara. "She's changed her opinion somewhat. I can tell." Amara said, "We need to move." They moved. Dario drove. Noel was in the back between Amara and Lucian, which was not comfortable for any of the three of them, but was the most defensible configuration. Dario made 3 course changes in the first 4 minutes without explanation, and nobody asked for one, because everybody in the car understood what the changes meant. Lucian was on the prepaid phone. She watched him work, the terse calls, the specific language, the way he said things to people that accomplished in 4 words what another man would need a paragraph for. He was good at this. She had always known that. What she had not known until very recently was that he knew it too and had been coasting on it in ways that had made him lazy. "Commission meeting," he said. "Tomorrow night, Rayner's estate. Tell Dominic it's about Hale." He listened. "Yes, that's exactly what I said. Tell him I have proof and I want a full table." He listened again. "Tell anyone who refuses that the proof includes their name and a payment record. That will secure the attendance." He hung up. She looked at him. "That last part was a bluff," he said. "I know," she said. "It was a good one." He almost smiled. Almost. They moved Noel to the apartment. Dario installed him in the bedroom with 2 men outside the door who arrived 20 minutes later in a car that had no visible affiliation with anything. Amara sat with Noel for 30 minutes while Dr. Celeste Huang, a physician Amara had on retainer whose name appeared nowhere in the Viscari organizational structure, examined his hand and his eye and told him what she could and couldn't fix tonight. Amara held his left hand while Celeste worked on the right, and she did not speak, and Noel did not speak. And the silence between them was the kind that happens between people who have been through something together and have run out of words that aren't inadequate. When Celeste was done, she looked at Amara in the kitchen doorway and said, 2 broken fingers, moderate concussion, no internal bleeding that I can identify. He needs rest, and he needs to not be moved unnecessarily. He'll be here through tomorrow night, Amara said. Good. Celeste looked at her. And you? I'm fine. You're 6 months pregnant, and you have the look of someone who hasn't slept in 30 hours. I'm fine, Celeste. The physician held her gaze for a moment. The baby is still moving normally? Yes. You'll tell me if that changes. Yes. Celeste left. Amara stood in the kitchen with her hands on the counter and her eyes on the window, and she let herself have 4 seconds. Just 4. The feeling in her chest, the compound thing, fear and exhaustion and relief, and something that was not quite grief but lived in the same neighborhood. She allowed it to exist for 4 seconds, and then she compressed it back down to a manageable size, and she went back into the main room. Lucian was at the table with Dario, the USB drive open on the laptop she kept in the apartment, the contents displayed on screen. Documents, communications, financial records, the layered evidence she had spent years accumulating. Dario was pointing at specific files. Lucian was listening. She stopped in the doorway and looked at that. Her husband and her husband's security chief working through materials she had built, following the architecture of something she had constructed alone over 7 years. And she felt the particular complex emotion of a person who has been self-sufficient for so long that being seen is almost indistinguishable from being exposed. She came to the table and sat down. The Hale evidence, she said. Pull up the 3rd folder, the payment records, and the Baron transcript. Dario navigated to it. For the commission meeting tomorrow, Amar said, we don't lead with financial evidence. Every family head in that room has financial exposure that makes them nervous about financial evidence. They worry about proximity, about what else might surface if that thread gets pulled. We lead with Hale. She looked at Lucian. Hale was theirs. He was the commission's. He was not affiliated with any single family. He was the neutral arbitrator, and they trusted him, and someone killed him and made it look like weather. That is the anger that moves men who are otherwise unmovable. You want to hit them in the loyalty, Lucienne said. I want to hit them in the memory, she said. Every man who sat across a table from Hale and shook his hand. I want them to remember what that felt like. And then I want them to understand that the Orlovs reached into their world and took that, and have been sitting across from them at every subsequent meeting pretending it was an accident. Dario was quiet for a moment. Then he said, It'll work. It has to work, Lucian said. Once we walk into that room, we can't walk back out the same way twice. We won't need to, Amara said. If we go in with the Baron testimony and the payment trail and the laboratory report on the capsules, the Orlovs will not survive the room. Mikhail Orlov has been playing a long game, and long games work when no one else knows the board. Tomorrow night, everyone in that room is going to see the board. She looked at the screen, at the documents she had built in silence over 7 years, in rooms no one else entered, at a desk no one else noticed. Get some sleep, she said. Both of you. We have 8 hours. Neither of them moved immediately. Dario looked at Lucian. Lucian looked at the screen. Then he closed the laptop and stood up and said, The inside leak. Whoever pulled the encrypted file from the estate network 6 weeks ago, that's not Reed. Reed is not that capable. No, Amara said, which means there's still someone we haven't identified. Yes. Could be anyone on the estate staff. Could be someone in my outer structure. Could be Ren, Amara said. Your physician, who prescribed the capsules and who consulted with you monthly about the symptoms he was monitoring. She held his eyes. If Ren is the second vector, then the network access would have been arranged through someone he brought in as part of a maintenance or consultation visit, someone who came to the estate with legitimate access and had the technical capability to bridge the network during a narrow window. Lucian absorbed this. I had a security consultation in September. Ren recommended the firm. The room was very quiet. I want Ren picked up tonight, Lucian said. Quietly, no noise. I want him held somewhere until after the commission meeting. Agreed, Dario said. Don't hurt him, Amar said. Both men looked at her. We need him coherent and available to corroborate the capsule evidence if it's challenged at the commission. A man with bruises does not make a credible witness. She looked at Dario. Contained, nothing more. Yes, ma'am, Dario said and left. The apartment was quiet. Lucian stood on the other side of the table from Amara, and they looked at each other in the particular way of people who have been through something together that they have not yet found the language for. Not reconciliation. That was too clean a word for something this complicated. Recognition, maybe. The slow and painful arriving at the awareness of who the other person actually is. You should sleep, he said. So should you. I'm not going to. Neither am I. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, and it came out not easily, not polished, the words arriving in the particular rough sequence of someone who is saying a true thing that has no rehearsed form yet. I spent 7 years not looking at you. She did not respond immediately. I know what I did, he said. I know what I built and how I built it and what I expected you to be inside it. I don't have a word for it that's adequate. I'm not going to use a word that isn't adequate. No, she agreed, but I need you to know that I see it now. What you built. What you did with 7 years of being invisible. He stopped. Started again. I don't know what to do with the fact that the person who saved my empire was the person I treated like furniture. Amara looked at him. She felt the truth of what he was saying, not the sentiment, which was incomplete and would need years to actually mean anything, but the fact of his saying it. The fact that he was choosing words this carefully, that he was not retreating into command or strategy or the professional register that was easier and safer. Tomorrow night, she said, after the meeting, we can talk about what we do with it. She touched the table between them. Right now I need the commission to hold, and I need Noel to testify, and I need our daughter to stay where she is for another 12 weeks. He nodded. She went to the bedroom, not the one Noel was in, the other one, The one she had used twice before on the night she had come here alone to work in the silence that this apartment provided. She lay down on top of the covers in her gala dress, and she closed her eyes and she did not sleep. Not immediately, because her mind was running the meeting tomorrow night in every possible configuration, testing each variable, identifying the failure points. The Orlov representative would appear. She was almost certain of that. Mikhail would not let the meeting happen without a presence. It would be a concession of weakness, and Mikhail Orlov had not held power for 23 years by conceding weakness. He would send someone who could argue, who could create counter-narrative, who could buy time. She thought about who that person would be. She thought about what argument they would make. She thought about Katerina Orlov, who was currently either in federal custody, 3 of Dario's calls tonight had been to people who could arrange that, or still free and operating, and which of those 2 scenarios was more dangerous. She was still running the calculation when she felt Lucian sit on the edge of the bed. She did not open her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. Just that. Not an apology, not a declaration, just information. She did not answer, but she did not move to the other side of the bed either. She lay there in her gala dress with her hand on her stomach, and she listened to the city outside the window. The freight train in the distance, moving through the industrial quarter, exactly as loud as it always was, covering everything smaller than itself. And she finally slept. She woke at 5:43 to Dario knocking once on the door, quick and specific. She was at the door before Lucian, which surprised neither of them. "Ren is contained," Dario said. He looked at her face and read it correctly. He talked, quickly. He confirmed the capsule substitution. He was the one who replaced the legitimate supplements in the first delivery. He was approached 8 months ago by an intermediary and paid a significant sum. He paused. He also confirmed that the security firm he recommended to Lucian in September was an Orlov-affiliated company. The network breach was executed during that consultation. "Is he coherent?" Amara said. "Shaken, but coherent. He understands what we need him to do tonight." "Does he understand what happens to him if he declines?" "He did not decline," Dario said. "He was very eager to be useful." She nodded. "What else?" Dario's jaw tightened. "Katerina Orlov, she's not in custody. She moved last night after the gala. We have a location. A hotel in the financial district, 3 blocks from Rayner's estate." He looked past her at Lucian, who was standing in the doorway of the bedroom. "She's not alone. 4 men at least, possibly more. And she's been making calls to the commission heads through the night. At least 4 of them took the call." Amara felt it move through her. Not fear, not anymore, but the particular cold clarity that came with understanding that the battleground was exactly as complicated as she had expected. "She's building an alternative," Amara said. "She's making the case to the swing votes on the commission that the Orlovs are the stable choice and the Viscaris are the chaos. She's been on those calls all night." "Can she swing them?" Lucian asked. Amara thought about it for exactly as long as it deserved. 2 of the 4 who took her call are opportunists. They will move toward whoever looks stronger in that room tonight. The other 2 are men who respected Hale. She looked at Lucian. "If Noel's testimony hits those 2 men correctly, we have the majority. But Katerina will be there tonight. She will have a counter-argument, and she will have had all night to build it." "What's the counter-argument?" Lucian said. "That the testimony is fabricated, that we manufactured a witness and a story to cover Viscari organizational instability." She looked at him. "She'll point to the burned estate and the warehouse attacks, and she'll frame them not as Orlov aggression, but as consequences of your own people losing confidence in your leadership. She'll say the houses are burning because your own men started the fire." Lucian was quiet. "It's a good argument," Amar said. "If she delivers it well, and Noel falters, it could be enough. Then we make sure Noel doesn't falter." "Noel will not falter," she said. "But she'll have a countermove we haven't anticipated. She always does." She looked at the window, the pale October dawn coming through it, the second dawn in 2 days that she had seen from the wrong side of sleeplessness. "We'll need to be ready to respond to something we can't predict." "That's not a plan," Lucian said. "It's an honest assessment," she said. "The plan is everything else we've prepared. The honest assessment is that Katerina Orlov is good at what she does, and we need to be better. Dario looked between them. There's one more thing. He reached into his jacket and removed a sealed envelope. Plain white, no marking on the outside. He held it out to Amara. It was under the windshield of the car when I went down to check on it an hour ago. No one on the street. No cameras in that block that aren't ours. She took it, turned it over, opened it. Inside was a single card, no letterhead, typed in plain 12-point font, 4 lines. She read it. She read it again. The color did not leave her face. She did not allow it to leave her face. But she stood for 3 seconds with the card in her hand and the particular stillness of someone who has just found a new variable in an equation they thought was solved, and then she folded it and placed it in her pocket. "What does it say?" Lucian said. She looked at him. "Katerina is not working for Mikhail Orlov," Amara said. Her voice was level, completely level. "She never was." Lucian went absolutely still. "Mikhail Orlov has been dead for 6 weeks, Amara said. The syndicate is being run by his nephew, Yevgeny Orlov, who is 29 years old and has been operating under Mikhail's name to prevent the network from fracturing during the transition." She looked at Dario, then back at Lucian. "Katerina is not the niece of the man I told you about. She is the niece of a man none of us have any information on, and Yevgeny Orlov has had 6 weeks to restructure an organization we thought we understood, using a playbook we haven't seen." The freight train moved through the industrial quarter in the distance, loud enough to cover everything smaller than itself. And in the apartment on the 7th floor, the 3 people standing in the hallway understood simultaneously that every calculation they had made through the night, every countermove prepared, every argument assembled for the commission meeting tonight, had been built against the wrong opponent. They had 12 hours. The commission table would be full, Katerina would be there, and the man behind her was not the man any of them had been fighting. Amara pressed her hand against her pocket, where the card was folded, and she looked at Lucian Viscari with the complete, unblinking steadiness of someone who has just had the ground removed from beneath them and has decided in that precise moment that falling is not an available option. "We adjust," she said, and in her voice there was no question. They had 12 hours, and they used all of them. Amara sat at the table in the apartment with the laptop open, and Dario across from her and Lucian standing at the window the way he had been standing at windows for 2 days now, and they rebuilt the case from the foundation. Not because the evidence had changed, the documents were intact, the testimony was intact. Noel was sleeping in the next room with 2 broken fingers and a concussion and enough stubborn survival instinct to walk into a room full of the most dangerous men on the East Coast and say what he knew. The evidence had not changed. What had changed was the target. Yevgeny Orlov, 29 years old. Dario pulled what he could in 4 hours through channels that did not leave traces. It was not much, but it was enough to build a picture. Yevgeny had grown up inside the organization, educated abroad, returned at 23 to work beneath his uncle as a financial architect. He was not a soldier. He had never been a soldier. He was a restructuring specialist, the kind of mind that looked at a criminal network the way a corporate consultant looks at a failing company. Identify the inefficiencies, eliminate the redundancies, replace the personnel who had accumulated too much independent loyalty. He had been running the Orlov network for 6 weeks under a dead man's name, and in those 6 weeks, he had not made a single visible move. No new territory, no direct confrontation. He had simply continued the operations already in motion, the poisoning, the intelligence gathering, the financial strangulation, and let them mature to the point where tonight's commission meeting would arrive as a conclusion rather than an escalation. He was patient in a way that Mikhail had never been. That was more frightening, not less. "He doesn't need to win tonight," Amar said, at 9 in the morning over coffee she wasn't tasting. "He needs the commission to fracture. A split vote is sufficient for his purposes. If he can't secure a majority behind Katerina's position, he only needs to create enough doubt that 2 or 3 families pull back from the Viscari alliance. That's enough to start the collapse." "So we need a clean majority," Lucian said, "not a persuasion, a declaration." "We need the room to understand that staying neutral is not a neutral act," Amar said. "If the families don't move together tonight, the Orlov network reads it as permission. And a 29-year-old who has already demonstrated he can run a major organization under complete secrecy for 6 weeks will not need much permission to finish what his uncle started. Lucian was quiet for a moment. You said 2 of the 4 families who took Katerina's calls respected Hale. Yes. Who were the other 2? Carmine Russo's son, Marco, and a man named Aldrich Peel, who runs the Northern Distribution Network and has been underpaying his commission obligations for 3 years. She looked at Lucian. Peel is in that meeting for one reason, to see which side wins and attach himself to it before anyone notices he was waiting. He is not a factor. Marco Russo is the factor. Marco is 26, Lucian said. He took over from Carmine 8 months ago. I've met him 3 times. He's smart, and he's scared, and he's trying not to show either. Scared men are movable, Dario said. Scared men are also unpredictable, Amara said. If Katerina gets to Marco before the meeting starts, if she finds the right pressure point, he could break publicly, and it would look like the beginning of a cascade. She thought about it. I want to talk to Marco before the meeting, alone. Both men looked at her. Not to make a case, she said, just to give him a face. He's been dealing with abstractions. The Viscari organization, the Orlov threat, the commission as a political structure. I want him to see a person. She paused. Specifically, I want him to see a pregnant woman who has been fighting this war for 2 days without sleeping, who is asking him to remember what his father stood for. She met Lucian's eyes. Carmine Russo and Hale were close. Marco knows that. Use what's true. Lucian looked at her for a long moment. That's not strategy, he said. That's something else. It's both, she said. The best moves usually are. She met with Marco Russo at 1 in the afternoon, in the lobby bar of a hotel that was neither his territory nor hers, at a table near the window where anyone passing could see them, which was a deliberate choice. She wanted the meeting visible, because a secret conversation before a commission meeting looked like conspiracy, and a visible conversation looked like a woman having coffee. Marco Russo was indeed 26, and he did indeed look scared, and he was working very hard to project the ease of someone who was not. He had his father's jaw and his mother's eyes, and neither of their comfort with silences, which meant he talked when he should have been listening, and Amara let him do it for the first 8 minutes. Then she said, Your father called me once. Marco went still. 3 years ago. He called the estate, not Lucian's line, my line, the household number that nobody outside domestic staff had any reason to call. I don't know how he got it. She held the cup in both hands. He asked me if I was all right. That was the entire call. He said he had been watching and he wanted to know if I was all right. She looked at Marco. I said yes, because I didn't know what else to say, and he said, good, call me if that changes. And he hung up. Marco's expression had done something complicated. He never told me that. No, I don't think he told anyone. She set the cup down. I'm telling you because I want you to understand that I know what kind of man your father was. And I want you to understand that the man who had Hale's brakes cut is the same man who would have eventually looked at your father the same way, as an obstacle to be engineered around. She held his eyes. Yevgeny Orlov is 29 years old, and he has been running his network in secret for 6 weeks, and nobody knew. That is not a man who is going to be satisfied with the northern distribution routes. He will want everything, and he will wait as long as it takes. Marco was quiet. Tonight, Amara said, you can vote for a coalition that stops him now, while we still have the leverage to do it. Or you can wait and see which way the room goes and attach yourself to the outcome. She paused. Your father would have voted before the room told him to. She left him with the check. She did not look back to see his face. Rayner's estate at 8 in the evening was nothing like the gala of 2 nights before. No string quartet, no champagne service. No women brought as accessories to power. The library, a long room with dark wood panels and a table that seated 20, was set for business, and the men who filed into it wore the particular expressions of people who have been told the meeting is important and have not yet decided how important to let themselves believe it is. Amara entered beside Lucian. She had changed into a charcoal gray dress, simple, Nothing performative about it. She carried nothing in her hands. The documents were already distributed. Dario had arranged for sealed folders to be placed at each seat an hour before arrival, which meant every person in that room had been reading the financial evidence for 60 minutes before she and Lucian walked through the door. The reading showed on their faces. Dominic Reiner was at the head of the table. He nodded at Lucian. He looked at Amara with an expression she had not seen from him before. Attentive, evaluating, the look of a man revising an estimate. Katerina was there. She was seated to the left of the table's midpoint, in a chair that placed her neither at the head nor at the margins. A deliberate positioning that communicated she was a participant, not a supplicant. She was in black tonight, and she looked at Amara with the expression Amara had seen in the ballroom 2 nights ago, the one that lived between admiration and hatred. Amara looked back at her without expression and took her seat. Lucian remained standing. The room settled. He did not begin with hail. Amara had counseled him on this, that do not begin with the emotional argument, because the room will anticipate it and prepare defenses against it. Begin with the structure. Give them the architecture of what had been done to them before you tell them who they lost. He walked them through it in 20 minutes. The poisoning, with Wren's written confirmation distributed in the folder. The network infiltration, with the intercepted communications and the Katerina identity documentation they had already seen at the gala, but which now sat alongside the additional 6 weeks of evidence Amara had compiled since she first identified the operation. The financial strangulation, the Orlov network's systematic acquisition of supplier relationships that fed the Vescari operation, designed to make the collapse look organic when it arrived. The room was very quiet. Then Lucian said Hale's name. He said it without setup, without introduction, just the name dropped into the silence like a stone, and he watched the faces at the table absorb it, the way certain faces tightened, the way certain eyes moved to the table surface and then back up. The mechanic who sabotaged his vehicle is in this building, Lucian said. He will come into this room and say what he was paid to do and by whom. He has documentation corroborating his account that is already in your folders. He looked around the table. You can read it, or you can hear it from the man himself. Your choice. Dominic Reiner looked at the folder. Bring him in, he said. Noel Barron walked into the room with his right hand wrapped and his left eye still swollen half shut, and he walked in the way a man walks who is more afraid of what he's carrying inside him than he is of the room he's walking into. He sat in the chair Dario placed at the foot of the table. He put his wrapped hand on the table. He looked at the faces looking at him. And he talked. He talked for 19 minutes. He did not use careful language. He used the language of a man who serviced vehicles for 30 years and made one very bad decision for money he needed and has been sleeping badly ever since. He said what he was paid. He said who approached him. He said what he was told to do and what he did and what he heard on the radio 3 days later about the accident on the highway. He said, I didn't know he was going to die. I knew he was going to crash. I told myself those weren't the same thing. He said, they are the same thing. I know that now. He stopped. The room was entirely silent. Then Katerina spoke. She did it well. Amara had expected her to do it well. She was precise and calm, and she raised the right questions. The corroboration chain, the provenance of the documents, the reliability of a witness who had admitted to criminal involvement and had obvious incentive to cooperate with a narrative that protected him. She did not overreach. She did not attack Noel personally, which would have been a mistake in a room that had just watched a frightened old man do something visibly difficult. She kept it procedural. And then she said, Yevgeny Orlov is prepared to offer the Commission a new framework of cooperation that does not depend on the stability of any single family's leadership. A distributed structure, shared territory oversight, financial transparency across all networks. She placed a folder on the table. Dario's men had not put that one there. Yevgeny Orlov, she said, extends this proposal in good faith as the current head of the Consolidated Eastern European Network and asks the Commission to consider it on its merits. She had just acknowledged Mikhail's death and Yevgeny's succession publicly, which meant the anonymous card left on their windshield this morning had been intended to reach them. The acknowledgement was deliberate. It was a calculated risk, admitting the deception in order to reframe it. We concealed the transition to ensure stability, not to deceive you. It was a good move. Amara picked up the folder Katerina had placed on the table. She opened it. She read the first 2 pages while the room waited, and she felt the shape of what Yevgeny had constructed. A genuinely sophisticated restructuring proposal. The kind of document that a 29-year-old with a business school education and 23 years of organizational study would produce. Clean language, plausible benefits, carefully distributed risk. She set the folder down. She looked at Katerina. This document was prepared before the estate was burned, she said, before the warehouses were destroyed, before a 61-year-old mechanic was beaten in his own shop. She held Katerina's eyes. It describes a new framework of cooperation and good faith, authored by a man whose network executed coordinated attacks on a commission member's property within the last 48 hours. She looked around the table. That is not a proposal. That is a terms of surrender document dressed in cooperative language. It is asking you to accept the Orlov network's dominance while calling it partnership. She reached into the folder at her own seat. She removed the laboratory report and placed it on the table. This is the toxicological analysis of the compound delivered in Lucian Vescari's supplements for 6 months. It is signed by the laboratory director and corroborated by a physician who has no organizational affiliation with this table. She placed Wren's written confession beside it. This is the admission of the physician who facilitated the delivery, who was recruited and paid by an Orlov intermediary 8 months ago. She placed one more document, and this is a financial transfer record showing a payment from an Orlov-controlled account to that intermediary, dated the week following Yevgeny Orlov's assumption of network control. She looked at the table. Yevgeny Orlov's first act as head of his network, she said, was to authorize the continued poisoning of a commission member. His second act was to plan a public humiliation operation. His third act was to order attacks on commission-associated properties. She let the silence hold for exactly the right number of seconds. He is 29 years old, and he has made 3 strategic errors in 6 weeks because he is intelligent enough to devise complex operations but not yet experienced enough to understand that the men in this room have been watching complex operations fail for longer than he has been alive. Marco Russo spoke. He spoke before anyone else at the table, and he said only 4 words, but 4 words from the right person at the right moment is more than enough. I vote with Vescari, he said. The room shifted. Dominic Rayner said, as do I. The other votes followed in the order Amar had predicted they would, with the exception of Aldrich Peel, who surprised her by speaking quickly rather than last, as if he had decided that being early was a safer position than being the final confirmation of a trend. She noted it. Peel was more strategically aware than she had credited. Katerina was still seated when the vote concluded. She looked at Amara. She looked at her for a long moment with that same unclassifiable expression, and then she said quietly enough that only the 3 seats closest to her could hear, "You built all of this from inside his house." "Yes," Amara said. "While he ignored you." "Yes." Katerina was quiet. Something moved across her face. Not regret, not admiration, something more complicated than either. The expression of a woman who had been trained from girlhood to inhabit power through proximity to men who held it, looking at a woman who had built it differently and knowing the difference in the result. "The next one won't be Yevgeny," Katerina said. "Someone will come after him." "I know," Amara said. "They always do." Katerina was taken into custody before she reached the door. Federal investigators, arranged through the same carefully chosen intermediaries who had received Amar's documentation 3 weeks earlier, were waiting in vehicles outside the estate. The arrests that followed over the next 72 hours were coordinated across 3 jurisdictions. Yevgeny Orlov was detained abroad before the sun came up on the following morning, in a city whose name reached Amara through Dario's text at 4:47 a.m. She read it standing in the bathroom of the apartment, and she stood there for a moment with her hand on the cold porcelain of the sink and her eyes on her own face in the mirror. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had not slept properly in 4 days and who was 6 months pregnant and who had just dismantled a network that had been running for over 2 decades. She looked like all of that simultaneously, and the mirror did not soften any of it. She looked at herself for a long time. Then she went back to bed. Lyra was born 11 weeks early, on a Tuesday morning, in the back bedroom of the apartment on the 7th floor, delivered by Celeste Huang with Lucien's hand around Amara's, and Dario in the hallway because Amara had told him to wait there, and nobody had countermanded it. The labor was fast and brutal, and Amara did not perform composure through it because there was no performance available to her at that level of pain, which was a new experience. The complete removal of the option to manage how she appeared. She made sounds she had never made before. She said things she did not remember afterward. She held Lucien's hand so hard that he had 2 fingers bruised the following day, which she learned about a week later, and felt something complicated about, the way a person feels complicated things about evidence of their own need. Lyra came into the world at 4 pounds 1 ounce, which is small in the way that all genuinely important things are small at their beginning. She was red and folded and entirely furious about the transition, which Amara recognized as an excellent sign. She cried immediately, which was the only sound in the room that mattered. Lucien held her for 3 minutes before she was taken to the neonatal unit, and Amara watched him hold her, watched his hands, which had signed death warrants and broken agreements, and built an empire through sustained intimidation, hold this 4-pound person with the specific terrified tenderness of someone who has just encountered something they cannot control or manage or protect through the usual means, and she understood something she had not had language for before. He had never known what it was to be responsible for something he could not threaten or buy or outmaneuver. He was learning it now. Lyra spent 3 weeks in the neonatal unit, and Amara spent most of those 3 weeks in a chair beside the incubator, reading documents she needed to review and making calls she needed to make, and also, in the hours between, simply sitting with her daughter and talking to her quietly about things that didn't matter. The names of the orchids she had grown, the way rain sounds different on different surfaces, the city they could see through the window when the angle was right. She did not know how much Lyra understood. She suspected it was more than people assumed about infants. She talked to her anyway. Lucien came every day. He did not make speeches about it. He did not make it a demonstration of change. He came, and he sat, and sometimes he talked to Lyra the same way Amara did, awkwardly, in the voice of a man who had spent 44 years talking to people in ways designed to achieve specific outcomes, and was learning, slowly and with visible effort, how to talk without an objective. He was not good at it yet. He was trying. On the 17th day, while Lyra slept in the incubator and Amara was reading a property transfer document from across the room, he said, "I want to put the estate in your name." She looked up from the document. "Why?" "Because it should have been in both our names from the beginning," he said, "and because putting it in yours is the closest I can get to correcting that without going back in time." "That's not how property decisions should be made," she said. "You don't sign things as apologies." He looked at her. "You sign things when they represent what's actually true," she said, "when they reflect a real structure." She set the document down. "A new property, smaller, both names. That's how we do it if we're doing it correctly." He was quiet for a moment. "You'll want approval rights on the architecture." "I'll want equal decision-making on everything," she said, which is different from approval rights. Approval rights is veto. Equal decision-making is conversation. She held his eyes. "You're going to find conversation considerably more difficult." "Probably," he said. "I know," she said. They were quiet for a while after that, with Lyra between them in the incubator doing the serious work of growing into herself. The burned estate was sold. Not quickly and not easily. Selling a property that size without the transaction appearing in places it would attract attention required the particular kind of financial architecture that Amara did well. She handled it herself, which nobody questioned anymore. The proceeds were divided, a portion into Lyra's trust, already established and signed and untouchable, a portion into the restructuring fund she had proposed in the weeks after the commission vote, the beginning of the long-promised transition toward legitimate operations. The criminal empire did not become a legitimate corporation overnight. It did not become one in 6 months or in a year. The transition was fractious and slow, and several men who had been loyal to Lucien for a decade left rather than accept the change, which was information she filed under expected losses. The men who stayed were worth more than the ones who left. Dario stayed. He never said why explicitly, which she respected. She suspected it was the same reason he had said, "Yes, ma'am," In the greenhouse, what felt like years ago, but was only a matter of weeks. A recognition of something real in a world built largely on performance. She kept the orchids going, in a new greenhouse, on a new property in both their names, where the security was better and the rooms were full of natural light, and Lyra slept in a room that looked out over a garden that no one was afraid of. She kept them going because they were hers, and they were alive, and they had nothing to do with anything except the quiet work of maintaining something fragile in difficult conditions. Marco Russo called her once, 3 months after the commission meeting. He did not say much. He said his father would have been, and then he stopped and chose a different word. He said his father would have respected it, what she had done. She thanked him. She did not say that respect, from men who had never looked at her, was something she had learned not to need, not because it didn't matter, but because it had arrived too late to be the point. The point was Lyra, sleeping in the afternoon light. The point was the property document with both their names on it. The point was the conversation she and Lucian had on a Sunday morning in March, in the kitchen of the new house, about a budget allocation that they disagreed about. And the disagreement did not end with him deciding and her accepting, and did not end with her building a secret contingency against the outcome. It ended with a compromise that neither of them loved and both of them could accept, which was something neither of them had ever had before, and which was, quietly and without ceremony, the most significant thing that had happened in the relationship. She thought about what her father had taught her, Elias Sorelli, who had placed her inside the most dangerous household in the city and told her to read everything and trust nothing and survive. He had been right about the first two. The third one she had done in ways he had not anticipated. She had not survived by becoming invisible. She had survived by being exactly what she was, in the moments when it mattered, in the rooms where the decisions were made. She had been underestimated by everyone in those rooms. She had decided at some point she could not precisely identify, somewhere between the second folder and the greenhouse and the burning east wing, that being underestimated was not something to correct. It was a resource, and she had used it. On a morning in April, when Lyra was 4 months old and had recently learned to follow movement with her eyes, which she did with an expression of serious concentration that Amara found entirely familiar, Lucian came into the nursery and stood in the doorway the way he always stood in doorways now, pausing, waiting to be acknowledged, which had become his way of asking without asking. She looked up. "The last Orlov asset," he said. "The account in Cyprus. It cleared this morning. International authorities have it." She nodded. "That's the last one," he said. "It's done." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Lyra, who had focused her very serious gaze on the light coming through the window, tracking it with the full intensity of someone who has just discovered that the world is full of moving things and intends to examine all of them. "For now," Amara said. Lucian was quiet. "Someone else will come," she said. "They always do." She looked back at him. "The difference is, we won't be what we were when this one came. We'll be something else." "What will we be?" he said. She looked at her daughter for a moment, at the light on the window, at the small person who had arrived impossibly early into a world that had been burning at the time, and who had decided to be here anyway with the pure unreasoned insistence of something that doesn't yet know it's supposed to be afraid. "Ready," Amara said. Lucian nodded once. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the chair beside hers, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching, and the three of them stayed like that for a while in the April morning, in a house with both their names on the door, while Lyra watched the light and found it sufficient and did not look away. The Silent Queen did not win by destroying the king. She won by refusing to be destroyed in the years when no one was watching, and in the end, that was the part no one had accounted for.